All right. So maybe we should get started and then see who gets to join us this evening. We're into the second half of the unfolding of world civilization from 1936. You will recall that the first section of it, Shoghi Effendi is talking about the future, the Baha'i world civilization, and he talks about the forces of integration and disintegration. And now he's been getting into the specifics so that we can actually understand from what's happening in the world around us, the forces of integration and disintegration. So last week he talked about the downfall of religions, and specifically he used Islam and Christianity as examples of that. Now, in Priceless Pearl, Rahia Khanum says that Shoghi Effendi read about 10 different newspapers. They were probably various languages, most likely the Jerusalem Post, and which is an old paper that was already going by his time, and probably London Times, maybe the New York Times, probably some Arabic and Persian papers, and I don't know what other periodicals he looked at, but he looked at a lot of different papers and journals, very much on top of what was going on in the world. So when we start going through some of his list of events, this is 1936 when he's writing. It's just at the very beginnings of World War II. And for him, these are not history, they're current events. And I think he assumes that the people who are reading this letter in the all over the Western countries would also know what he's talking about. So obviously, for us, it's history, and it's a little harder to sometimes figure out what he's talking about. So I've spent a little bit of time looking at this book, Modern Times by Paul Johnson, the British historian, which is considered sort of the best general summary of mid to late 20th century events. It's used often as a college textbook. So hopefully I can explain to you what The Guardian is alluding to as we go through some of the bullet points in this section. So my hope is to get through actually the next 3 sections, which will leave us 8 pages for next week, which would bring us to the end of the letter and the book. All right. Any comments or thoughts or questions before we jump in this evening? If not, Iman, could you read the first paragraph, please? Signs of moral downfall.
Signs of moral downfall. No more, I believe, need be said of the decline of religious institutions, the disintegration of which constitutes so important an aspect of the formative period of the Baha'i era. Islam has both, as a result of the rising tide of secularism and in direct consequence of its declared and persistent hostility to the faith of Baha'u'lláh, sunk to a depth of abasement rarely attained in its history. Christianity had, likewise, owing to causes not wholly dissimilar to those operating in the case of its sister faith, steadily weakened and was contributing in an increasing measure its share to the process of general disintegration, a process that must necessarily precede the fundamental reconstruction of human society.
Okay, thank you. Hello, Katya. We've been missing you the last few weeks.
I know I've been missing the sessions, but I've been super busy these past few weeks. I'm excited. I'll be here for only like 20 minutes tonight, though.
Well, we're sorry. You know, one of your great suggestions was to record the sessions, and we never got around to that. But anyway, we're glad to have you. So we'll understand if you have to leave.
Thank you.
So we're in Unfolding World Civilization, the last letter, and we're now in the second half of it, where the Guardian is laying out for the Western believers all the signs of the collapse, the disintegration of society. And last week we focused on religion, specifically Islam and Christianity. And this time we'll look at both the moral and the political spheres, as well as the Baha'i concept of collective security. So this first paragraph is sort of a just recapitulation of what we did last week about Islam and Christianity. So he says that in this last bit that the weakening of Islam and Christianity is a process that must necessarily precede the fundamental reconstruction of human society. So Imam, could you go ahead and read the next paragraph as well, please?
The signs of moral downfall, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
As distinct from the evidences of decay in religious institutions, would appear to be no less noticeable and significant. The decline that has set in its fortunes of Islamic and Christian institutions may be said to have its counterpart in the life and conduct of the individual that compose them. In whichever direction we turn our gaze, no matter how cursory our observation of the doings and sayings of the present generation, we cannot fail to be struck by the evidence of moral decadence,
Mm-hmm.
which in their individual lives, no less than in their collective capacity, men and women around us exhibit.
So what is the Guardian saying here?
I guess anywhere we look, we can see how Islam and Christianity, like through any lens you look, and see how it's been, I guess, evidence of moral decadence is negative.
Right. So people who may claim to be Christians or Muslims, you can see in their lives, because their faiths have declined, the evidence of moral decadence.
Mm.
And it also collectively, you see that as groups of people are moral decadent. So he says, look around you. So now he's going to talk a little bit about why we have moral decay, and then he'll get into some of the specifics of moral decay. So the first and most important one, coming off of this discussion on the decline of Christianity and Islam, is that he says the decline of religion as a social force is chiefly responsible for so grave, so conspicuous an evil. So as religion, it's very interesting. You most probably have all heard of Alex de Tocqueville. He was a Frenchman who came to the United States in the early 19th century and traveled around, and then wrote a traveler's book about the United States, which is, it was not the only one written at the time. There were other people from Europe coming and doing the same thing, but his has been sort of a touchstone for a view of what the United States was like in the early years of the Republic. And one of de Tocqueville's observations was that here we were, a people who had a huge amount of land around. So a person could live with no neighbors in sight, live with a mile between them and the next person. And that the reason that we could live so spread out and with the nearest policeman 100 miles away was we were a religious people. And religious people will behave themselves because they're not worried about whether a policeman's going to come and arrest them for bad behavior, but because they're worried about God's wrath. So the fear of God is part of what keeps people in line. And when you don't have that fear of God, or you don't have that religious sense, you don't have the internal constraints that help us to, as a society, to behave appropriately. So here are three quotes that the Guardian gives. Religion is the greatest of all means for the establishment of order in the world and for the peaceful contentment of all that live therein. The weakening of the pillars of religion has strengthened the hands of the ignorant and made them bold and arrogant. Verily, I say, whatsoever hath lowered the lofty station of religion hath increased the waywardness of the wicked, and the result cannot be but anarchy. He also says religion is a radiant light, impregnable stronghold for the protection and welfare of the people of the world. For the fear of God impelleth man to hold fast to that which is good and shun all evil. This is one of the reasons why, if you read the quotes relating to family life, Baha'i parents are admonished to teach their children the fear of God. Let's see, where am I here? Should the lamp of religion be obscured, chaos and confusion will ensue, and the lights of fairness, of justice, of tranquility, and peace cease to shine. So, do we see the lights of religion going out? Are we seeing the lights of fairness, justice, tranquility, and peace ceasing to shine? Know thou, Bahá'u'lláh also says, that they who are truly wise have likened the world unto the human temple. As the body of man needeth a garment to clothe it, so the body of mankind must needs be adorned with the mantle of justice and wisdom. Its robe is the revelation vouchsafed unto it by God. So he says that since we've quenched the light of religion, all these evils are coming out in the world. And here's his list. Perversion of human nature. What's he talking about there? Perversion of human nature. Any ideas? Degradation of human conduct. Well, until the 1960s, behavior such as homosexuality, I could list a whole bunch of things, bestiality, other kinds of things were considered a perversion of human nature. People who did those things were considered to be in need of a doctor, that something was wrong with them. The desire to treat a pregnancy as though the baby is not a human being is a perversion of human nature. While the baby is still in the womb, that's a perversion of human nature. The degradation of human conduct.
So this is what he's saying, that religion, without religion, this is what has been a cause.
Exactly.
Mm.
You know, this is one of the reasons the LGBT community is going after churches and religious people, because religious people have always condemned or treated as a form of perversion.
Mm.
Which is how the Baha'i faith sees that behavior as behavior that it doesn't make you evil, it makes you in need of help. So there are many things that we now figure, you know, if the person wants to do it, why not, you know? Degradation of human conduct, the way people treat each other, talk to each other, the widespread use of porn and the mental ideas that it gives people about what an appropriate relationship is. It's not just, of course, sexuality. It's things like, well, I should be able to not report honestly on my taxes. What difference does it make? Nobody else does it. If I encroach on my neighbor's yard and keep moving the property line over, who cares? You know, they're There are all kinds of things that people do. Corruption and dissolution of human institutions. I think we just saw that this week on Wednesday, didn't we? Reveal themselves under such circumstances in their worst and most revolting aspects, the corruption and dissolution of human institutions. So, you know, we're seeing all kinds of institutions, educational, medical, governmental, you name it. The worst parts of them are coming out because they're falling apart. Human character is debased. Confidence is shaken. The nerves of discipline are relaxed. Here's the big one. The voice of human conscience is stilled. The sense of decency and shame is obscured. You know, when I was a kid, they just started having movies with a little bit of nudity in it, and violence was usually implied and not shown. And actors, you know, there was a big debate among actors whether it was right to allow themselves to be shown nude or whatever. Now nobody cares. I mean, there are people posting pictures of themselves all over the place, and the way they dress and the way our society acts, there is no sense of decency and shame. People get on Oprah and tell all their personal problems and family history. Conceptions of duty, of solidarity, of reciprocity and loyalty are distorted. I mean, how often do we think about the concept of duty, solidarity, reciprocity, and loyalty? And the feelings of peacefulness, of joy, and of hope is gradually extinguished. Look at the opioid crisis in the United States. That's because of the lack of feelings of peacefulness, joy, hope, extinguished. In fact, all use of mind-altering substances is really an indication of that. So this is what Chogi Effendi says is happening. And remember, he's writing this many years ago. It's worse now. So now he's calling us to unity, says that of course, Bahá'u'lláh says, no two men can be found who may be said to be outwardly and inwardly united, that there's disunity everywhere. How long will humanity persist in its waywardness? How long is chaos and confusion to reign amongst men? The winds of despair are alas blowing from every direction, and the strife that divideth and afflicteth the human race is daily increasing. So I had to myself look up the word recrudescence, which means the return of something bad. So, you know, we thought we got through the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s, and here we are all over again having to fight the same battle. So he says, here's some of the bad things that have come back again: religious intolerance, racial animosity, patriotic arrogance, increasing evidences of selfishness, suspicion, fear, fraud, the spread of terrorism, lawlessness, drunkenness, crime, the unquenchable thirst for and the feverish pursuit after earthly vanities, riches, and pleasures, the weakening of family solidarity, the laxity in parental control, lapse into luxurious indulgence, California and Florida, the irresponsible attitude towards marriage and the consequent rise of divorce, the degeneracy of art and music, the infection of literature and the corruption of the press, the extension of the influence and activities of those prophets of decadence who advocate companionate marriage. This is companionate marriage is another way for living, to say living with someone you're not married to, which has become the norm, right? Who preach the philosophy of nudism, that it's okay whether you don't cover up or not, who call modesty an intellectual fiction, who refuse to regard the procreation of children as the sacred and primary purpose of marriage. Hence the reason for allowing gay marriage, to say that it's about adult emotions, not about procreation, who denounce religion as an opiate of the people, who would, if given free rein, lead back the human race to barbarism, chaos, and ultimate extinction. These appear as the outstanding characteristics of a decadent society, a society that must either be reborn or perish. So what do you think about this list of The Guardian? Any one item on there jump out at you or make you think for a minute?
I think.
Wait,
Oh, go ahead.
no, please.
Yeah, Katya, since we might lose you, go ahead.
Okay, I might be able to stay a little longer, but I'm here with my mom on this end, and we were just talking about how we can really see all of these things happening around us. So, like, every single item, and I think that was kind of shocking to see that.
Yeah. When you put it out as bullet points and not just a long run-on sentence in a big paragraph, it really does hit you, right? Yeah, Martine?
Is he saying, is Shoghi Effendi saying this is the things that are going to happen?
They were
Or
already going on in the 20s and 30s, the 20s in particular. But I mean, the 30s, like the spread of terrorism. We went through that in the early 1920s with bombs going off. We had one go off in front of the stock exchange. We had in Israel, where he was, in the 1930s, we had the blowing up of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. Those were terrorist acts. And but all of these other things, marriage and divorce were, divorce was almost unheard of until the 20s and 30s. Degeneracy of art and music, literature, infection of literature, corruption of the press. Just look at the subject matter. Every novel's got to have some sort of sexual encounter in it, right? And the level of violence and rap music with a lot of references actually to rape. I mean, even a lot of other popular music. You know, It's Cold Outside, which is always popular in the Christmas playlist, is essentially about a woman who's saying, I want to leave, and the man is saying, no, 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 I'm not letting you leave. It's a very scary song, actually, if you listen to it from the perspective of the woman. And
you know,
yeah.
Kathy, what's interesting is that all these things, like, we see them happening today, but at the same time, the argument that, you know, I think politics has made in our country specifically is that it's okay that these are happening. It's
Right.
okay that people are getting divorced, because why would you want people that are not loving together be together?
Right.
What is religious intolerance? Not everybody has to be religious. You know, the press needed to change, you know, so I see it as, I can see how someone looks at this and says, well, this is a very conservative view and it's very opposite of what we need to be today. But at the same time, it's like, wow, like, when you put all of them at a list one by one, it's a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah.
The one about the infection of literature was also catching my eye as you mentioned it. And I was more so thinking of it as idle fancies and vain imaginings, as we say. And
Yeah.
a lot of the time I remember, for one thing, I have a friend, a close friend, who was reading like a thick fantasy novel or something, and I'm not really into that. and I kind of roasted him about it. And I was like, "You're reading all this? What is this?" And he was like, "How can you?" And I was trying to explain, like, maybe I shouldn't have, but I was saying, like, "What are you reading? Like, this is a waste of time, kind of." And he was kind of taken aback. He was saying, "How can you say any kind of book is like a waste of time, or how can you say any kind of literature can be, you know, uh, a waste of time or bad for you, or idle fancies or whatever?" Um, but I also oftentimes I think of this one experience I had at a Barnes and Noble, and I remember there was like a little kid there with his parents, or her, I can't remember, and the mother was trying to explain, like, there's a lot of crappy books that you can be reading, and there's a lot of good quality novels as well. Oh, it says my internet is unstable. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're doing fine, Suresh.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I really agreed with that, the mother who was saying that, and that's what I was trying to get across, as about the quality of the literature and the quality of the content that you're consuming. There is really a different, a range of different um, material that people can choose to consume in terms of quality and how worthwhile it is to read uh, a given book or novel.
Well, Shoghi Effendi very much appreciated Tolstoy and Dostoevsky as novelists. And of course, Anna Karenina deals with the whole issue of adultery. And, and one day, Shoghi Effendi was asked which he thought was the better of the two, Tolstoy or Dostoevsky, and he said Dostoevsky. But they had some difficult themes to deal with, and literature has always allowed us to deal with difficult ideas, but hopefully in a way that's moral. And Anna Karenina suffers for having committed adultery. Unfortunately, her lover doesn't suffer like she does. So it was sort of the double standards of the time. But there's so many, literature can lift you up or it can pull you down. And one of the things I kept trying to explain to people why I was vying for the Mean Mother Award at the World Center was that there are images I have in my head from, well, including stories I was required to read in high school, that I don't want those images in my head. And there are positive images I could have in my head that I can get from literature. I don't have to get the negative stuff and the terrifying stuff. And so anyway, but the infection of literature with all this laxity and lack of any spiritual sense in there. One of my favorite books, by the way, is a book called Christie by Catherine Marshall, which came out in the 1960s and is still in print today, still very popular. They made a TV series out of it and so forth 20 years ago. But one of the things I liked about it was all the main characters in it were fighting spiritual battles, and the book portrayed it as spiritual battles. And there's some wonderful literature that does it, but there's also a lot of stuff that's awful. I remember Amatul Bahari Hiakanim one time talking about this, and she said there was some novel or book she wanted to read when she was a teenager. And essentially, her mother, Mae Maxwell, said to her, "You're not old enough for that book. And you've got to be a lot older to be able to read that book." And my mother used to say, "Well, your grandmother's not old enough to read that book." But anyway, they're books that are worthless. So I can't say whether you judged correctly with your friend's book, because sometimes science fiction and fantasy are used as a way of talking about the real world, but in a way that helps you see it with different eyes and explore it in a less emotional way. That's what Harry Potter does. Any other comments or ones that jump out at you on this list?
Kathy, real quick, when it talks about the extension of the influence of activities of those prophets of descendants who um, denounce religion as an opioid of the people, what does that mean exactly?
Well, that's actually a quote from, I think it's from Karl Marx or Engels. I can't remember which of the two said it. Denounce religion.
Vladimir Lenin.
Lenin. Okay, Lenin said it. Thank you, John, our scholar. So that's the idea that only weak people use religion. It's like a drug to help you get through the day, like, smoking grass, so you don't have to deal with reality. So there are people who see religion as being just that. You go and converse with your invisible friend, and it makes you feel better, just like smoking a joint or drinking whiskey makes you feel. So they don't see it as we see it. They put us down as being weak. It's like one of our former presidents said, clinging to our Bibles and our guns, right? Political and economic structure. So he says we are seeing the same disintegration as a preamble to the golden age in the political world. All right, so let's see. Sarush, can you read through this paragraph, which has some bullets?
Sure. The passionate and violent happenings that have in recent years strained to almost the point of complete breakdown the political and economic structure of society are too numerous and complex to attempt, within the limitations of this general survey, to arrive at an adequate estimate of their character. Nor have these tribulations, grievous as they have been, seemed to have reached their climax and exerted the full force of their destructive power. The whole world, wherever and however we survey it, offers us the sad and pitiful spectacle of a vast and enfeebled and moribund organism, which is being torn politically and strangulated economically by forces it has ceased to either control or comprehend. The Great Depression, the aftermath of the severest ordeals humanity had ever experienced, the disintegration of the Versailles system, the recrudescence of militarism in its most menacing aspects, the failure of vast experiments and newborn institutions to safeguard the peace and tranquility of peoples, classes, and nations, have bitterly disillusioned humanity and prostrated its spirits. Its hopes are for the most part shattered. Its vitality is ebbing. Its life strangely disordered. Its unity severely compromised.
Does it seem like a timely paragraph? Passionate and violent happenings. The whole world is being torn politically and strangulated economically by forces it has ceased to either control or comprehend. It doesn't even understand what's going on. So this is 1936. They're in the midst of the Great Depression, which was not just in the United States, but was a worldwide economic catastrophe, fueled in part by tariffs. The aftermath of the severest ordeals humanity had ever experienced. He's talking about the aftermath of World War I. The disintegration of the Versailles system. This is the treaty at the end of World War I that tried to set up a new world with protectorates under the mandates under the United Nations for certain countries, and set up a system to keep Germany from rising again and so forth. That's all falling apart by 36. It's pretty much dead, most of it. Militarism is on the rise again, even though they had tried to kill it at the end of World War I. And then all these vast experiments, newborn institutions. So the vast experiments, he's probably referring mainly to what's going on in Russia with the socialist experiments, the communist experiments. There also were socialist experiments happening in some countries, and newborn institutions such as the League of Nations, which is supposed to safeguard peace, but is not doing it. So all of these are making people disillusioned and no longer having any spirit or hope. So what's happening in 1936? Europe says all of these are destined to precipitate the most awful and implacable suffering. It's anticipating World War II. North America is in the midst of the Depression, industrial disorganization, widespread discontent at the abortive experiments designed to readjust an ill-balanced economy. And it's scared it's going to get pulled into what's going on in Europe and Asia again. And so it says that he sees World War II coming. So he says the United States is, all these things show that it's about to go into one of the most critical phases of the history of the American Republic, World War II. Asia, she's menaced on her eastern confines by the onset of forces that threaten to intensify the struggles which the growing nationalism and industrialism of her emancipated races must ultimately engender. So on the east, the landmass of Asia, what it's talking about is the rise of Japan. And the growing nationalism, this is what's going on in China with, they've deposed the emperor, they've got wars going on under the Chinese nationalists against the communists. There's rising nationalism in the colonies of Asia, such as in Vietnam against the French and so forth. Ho Chi Minh is starting to arise in Vietnam, for example. So Africa, here he's talking about an atrocious and bloody war destined to exert through its worldwide repercussions the most disturbing influence on the races and colored nations of mankind. This is Mussolini going to war with what we now call Ethiopia. At the time it was Abyssinia, was the name of the country. But Ethiopia is strategically located in the shipping lanes headed to the Suez Canal. And so Mussolini went in and then Italy invaded, and he talks about this later, refers to it ambiguously later. This was the first real test of the League of Nations. They tried to impose sanctions on Italy, but Italy didn't care. So he says that this war in Abyssinia is having a huge psychological impact on all the peoples of Africa who are tired of being colonized by Europeans. So here's what the situation is. They've got no less than 10 million people under arms. And 3 times that number are hoping to overthrow colonial powers. There are all kinds of people who are embittered because of what has happened during the course of the Depression. And then you've got many countries where there's an arms race going on. And so the government is taxing their population extensively. And this is being further exacerbated by the tariffs, which are causing the collapse of international trade. So you've got a lot of people who are upset and angry for the way the world is going. Humanity would seem to be definitely entering the outer fringes of the most agonizing phase of its existence. And then he quotes some of his contemporaries, one of which says, if war should break out again on a major scale in Europe, it must bring the collapse of civilization as we know it in its wake. If you don't end war, war will end you. Another war will destroy us. So he's trying to let us know he's not the only one who sees these things. So here are some examples he gives of ways in which the international political situation is just tanking. Nothing's working out. So the failure of both the disarmament and economic conferences. There were a number of conferences after World War I in the 1920s and 30s, trying to deal with the issue of disarmament and particularly the economic issues of the Great Depression. Then the second one is the London Naval Treaties that he's talking about. There was a conference in London because Japan in particular was building battleships at a very rapid pace, and Germany was starting to do it. And so they tried to have a treaty where Japan, Britain, other countries would agree to limit their battleships. And Japan just basically tanked that agreement. Withdrawal of two of the most powerful and heavily armed nations of the world from the League of Nations, that's Germany and Japan. The ineptitude of the parliamentary system of government is witnessed by recent developments in Europe and America. The governments in, France has had a hard time governing itself for a long time. Germany tried a parliamentary system after the Kaiser was overthrown, and that got overthrown fairly, it was a total mess. Other countries are finding the same problem. The US is under Roosevelt at this point. It's become sort of one-party rule. The inability of the leaders and exponents of the communist, and now he's got a capital C here, meaning the Communist Party movement, to vindicate the much vaunted principle of the dictatorship of the proletariat. So the ideal of, yes, they're going to have the poor working classes run the government. In fact, it just becomes a new group, small clique who make themselves rich running everything. The perils and privations to which the rulers of the totalitarian states have in recent years exposed their subjects. I think one of the big things he's talking about here is what Stalin did with the collectivization program, which was going on in the 20s and 30s in Russia. When you have a system where the government is to own all property, that means they have to take away property from people. So when they went after people's farms and houses and so forth, people resisted. So they sent the army in and just basically killed huge numbers of Russian peasants, and as part of the collectivization that went on to impose communism. And the same thing started happening in Germany and also in Italy. They didn't try to do what Stalin did of own all property, but they took over factories, and because they were busy militarizing, they were taxing like crazy and forced labor, all kinds of things going on. So I think totalitarian states would have been Russia, Germany, Italy, and by the 30s, it would also have included Spain. And he says, all of these things demonstrate beyond the shadow of a doubt the impotence of present day institutions to avert the calamities with which human society is being increasingly threatened. So he says, we have all these cumulative evidences of disintegration. Every system, short of the unification of the human race, has been tried, repeatedly tried, and found wanting. So Baha'u'llah's subscription, mankind is one, is the only thing that's going to fix this. He says, treaties, pacts, covenants, we've tried all that. We've had wars. We've tried different systems of government. We've tried tinkering with those systems of government. Different economic plans have been tried. Crisis has succeeded crisis. The rapidity with which a perilous, unstable world is declining has been correspondingly accelerated. So nothing is working. An ever deepening gloom is settling on the world's fortunes as she recedes further and further from the outer fringes of the darkest zone of its agitated life and penetrates its very heart. Now he's going to talk about the League of Nations. So he says there are some glimmers of hope on the international horizon. And he says, we can see a few things that show that the spirit of the age of Bahá'u'lláh is starting to take effect. And the first is the League of Nations. And he says, though the great outcry raised by post-war nationalism is growing louder and more insistent every day, the League of Nations is as yet in its embryonic state, and the storm clouds that are gathering may for a time totally eclipse its powers and obliterate its machinery. Yet, the direction in which the institution itself is operating is most significant. The voices that have been raised ever since its inception, the efforts that have been exerted, the work that has already been accomplished, foreshadow the triumphs which this presently constituted institution or any other body that may supersede it, he's foreshadowing the United Nations, is destined to achieve. So he's saying, you know, at least we're trying to have some kind of a world government. And people are saying the right things, and it's moving in the right direction. It's just that events are overtaking the United League of Nations, but it will ultimately have its impact. So then he talks about some of the attempts at security, collective security, that have happened since the League of Nations was born, the Treaty of Guarantee, the Geneva Protocol. I think this was where they came up with the so-called articles of war, you know, how prisoners of war to be treated and so forth. There's already been a proposal for a United States of Europe, Maastricht. And then he says the most significant landmark in the history of the League of Nations is the policy of sanctions initiated against any of its members who screw up or become aggressive. There's something the Guardian doesn't bring up in this paragraph, and let me sort of talk about this for a minute. In 1927 or 28, the Kellogg-Briand Treaty was entered into by, well, it was between the US and France, but then I think 60 countries joined it. And it's a very short little treaty, essentially outlawing war. Now, many people, many historians have looked at that treaty and said, well, that was silly. How can you just outlaw war? You know, what good is a piece of paper to outlaw war? Well, according to international norms and what was considered international law in the run-up to World War I, if you tried to be neutral but wanted to still trade with one of the belligerents, then the other belligerent had a right to consider you to be an enemy and attack you too. There was no right to neutrality, and if you sanctioned a belligerent because you didn't like what they were doing, that was considered an act of war against that belligerent, and they had a right to come after you because there was a right under international law to go to war before World War I. The Kellogg-Briand Treaty, for the first time, made it legal for a country to sanction a belligerent or to continue to trade with one of the parties that was engaged in a war without the other party considering them an enemy. And it was the Kellogg-Briand Treaty that was used as the basis for the war crimes trials at the end of World War II, because Germany was a signatory to that treaty. So they used that as a violation of the law, international law, through that treaty. This was a very big thing, even though at the time it was laughed at. Now I think there are a lot more than 60 countries that have signed the Kellogg-Briand Treaty. So he says in this next paragraph that when Mussolini and Italy under Mussolini invaded the peaceful country of Abyssinia, Ethiopia, the League of Nations, which at that time had 50 members, nation state members, condemned it and imposed sanctions on Italy for doing that. And he says this is the first time in the history of humanity that the system of collective security foreshadowed by Bahá'u'lláh and explained by Abdul-Baha has been seriously envisaged, discussed, and tested. And he said, for the first time in history, it has been officially recognized and publicly stated that for this system of collective security to be effectively established, strength and elasticity are both essential. Strength involving the use of inadequate force to ensure the efficacy of the proposed system, and elasticity to enable the machinery that has been devised to meet the legitimate needs and aspirations of the aggrieved upholders. So with the situation with the war in Africa, for the first time, there was the idea that other countries could provide a military force if necessary, or if not that, to use economic sanctions. It didn't have to just be a statement condemning them. It could actually have some teeth to it. For the first time in human history, tentative efforts have been exerted by the nations of the world to assume collective responsibility, to supplement their verbal pledges by actual preparation for collective action. And again, for the first time in history, a movement of public opinion has manifested itself in support of the verdict, which the leaders and representatives of nations have pronounced, and for securing collective action in pursuance of such a decision. So the peoples of the world supported, by and large, supported the League of Nations decision against Italy. So he's letting us know baby steps are happening. This new baby, the concept of a world government and collective security, has taken its first step. Might fall down immediately afterwards, but it's historic because it's taken a first step. And he wants us to look for those kind of first steps. So for example, I remember when the United States went in and because of Kuwait, when Iraq invaded Kuwait when George Herbert W. Bush was president, and we got a coalition of about 60 countries that went after Iraq militarily as a coalition, as an international coalition. The House of Justice applauded that because it was doing the same thing as the Shoghi Effendi is applauding with the League of Nations going after Italy. So let's see, John, can you read the next two paragraphs, please?
Sure. How clear, how prophetic must sound the words uttered by Bahá'u'lláh in the light of recent international developments. Be united, O concourse of the sovereigns of the world, for thereby will a tempest of discord be stilled amongst you, and your peoples find rest. Should anyone among you take up arms against another, rise ye all against him, for this is not but manifest justice. The time must come, he foreshadowing the tentative efforts that are now being made has written, when the imperative necessity for the holding of a vast and all-embracing assemblage of men will be universally realized. The rulers and kings of the earth must needs attend it, and participating in its deliberations must consider such ways and means as will lay the foundations of the world's great peace among men. Should any king take up arms against another, all should unitedly rise and prevent him. All should unitedly arise and prevent him. The sovereigns of the world, writes Abdul-Baha in elaboration of this theme, must conclude a binding treaty and establish a covenant, the provisions of which shall be sound, inviolable, and definite. They must proclaim it to all the world and obtain for it the sanction of all the human race. All the forces of humanity must be mobilized to ensure the stability and permanence of this most great covenant. The fundamental principle underlying this solemn pact should be so fixed that if any government later violate any one of its provisions, all of the governments on earth should arise to reduce it to utter submission. Nay, the entire human race as a whole should resolve with every power at its disposal to destroy that government.
Which we managed to do with Saddam Hussein. Took a while to get Mussolini.
His own people got him first, though, didn't they?
Yeah, I think so. We've heard this before, but we have to keep remembering these things. But he says, even though this is the beginning, it still immeasurably falls short of the essential requirements of the system which these words foreshadow. The League of Nations still lacks the universality, which is the prerequisite of abiding success in the efficacious settlement of international disputes. So only about 50 or 60 countries have joined, and the first, he brings up the fact that the US never joined it. Germany and Japan have already withdrawn from it. Italy ultimately withdrew from it. At the moment, the League looks toothless. The League itself will perish and be submerged by the flood of tribulations destined to overtake the whole race. Be that as it may, the significance of the steps already taken cannot be ignored. Whatever the present status of the League or the outcome of its historic verdict, whatever the trials and reverses which in the immediate future it may have to face and sustain, the fact must be recognized that so important decision marks one of the most distinctive milestones on the long and arduous road that must lead it to its goal, the stage at which the oneness of the whole body of nations will be made the ruling principle of international life. This historic step is a faint glimmer in the darkness that envelops an agitated humanity. The process of disintegration must continue. The corrosive influence must penetrate deeper and deeper into the very core of a crumbling age, until finally, coming out of the fires of the fierce ordeal, we will have one organic commonwealth, one vast, unified, and harmoniously functioning system. Adversities, unimaginably appalling. This is the eve of World War II. Undreamed of crises and upheavals, war, famine, and pestilence might well combine to engrave in the soul of an unheeding generation those truths and principles which it has disdained to recognize and follow. A paralysis more painful than any it has yet experienced must creep over and further afflict the fabric of a broken society ere it can be rebuilt and regenerated. What do you think the Guardian means by that last sentence? Paralysis must creep over and afflict the fabric of a broken society before we can rebuild and regenerate. Any thoughts, gentlemen? My own opinion is that he's saying that until you get to the point where nobody knows where to turn, they're stuck. Sort of where the United States, I think, has just about reached this point where we don't know what to do. We know we're broken. We know we have two divisions almost equal in size, so neither side can totally dominate the other. There's no compromise. There doesn't seem to be a way forward. You can't even get a bill through Congress anymore in our society. It takes that kind of painful paralysis where you don't know who to turn to. You can't trust this group. You can't trust the church. You can't trust the government. You can't trust the universities. The newspapers are all lying to you. The media is all lying to you. You can't turn to your family because your family's broken. When it gets to that point, then as a society, there will be a cry for another way to be rebuilt and regenerated. Does that make sense? It sort of seems to me that that's sort of where the world is right now, that people are just, they don't know what to do. We've tried the man on the white horse. We've tried all these other things. So let's see. Imam, can you read this last paragraph?
The civilization, writes Baha'u'lláh, so often vaunted by the, what is it?
Vaunted.
Vaunted.
Told, put
Hmm.
forward as being great.
By the learned exponents of arts and sciences will, if allowed to overleap the bounds of moderation, bring great evil upon men. If carried to excess, civilization will prove as prolific a source of evil as it has been goodness when kept within the restraints of moderation. The day is approaching when its flame will devour the cities, when the tongue of grandeur will proclaim, "The kingdom is God's, the Almighty, the All-Praised." From the moment the Surah Tablet Rais was revealed, he further explains, until the present day, neither hath the world been tranquilized, nor have the hearts of its people been at rest. Its sickness is approaching the stage of utter hopelessness, inasmuch as the true physician is debarred from administering the remedy, while its unskilled practitioners are regarded with favor and are accorded full freedom to act. The dust of sedition hath clouded the hearts of men and blinded their eyes. Ere long they will perceive the consequence of what their hands have wrought in the day of God. This is the day, he again has written, whereon the earth shall tell out her tidings. The workers of iniquity are here her burdens. The crier hath cried out, and men have been torn away. So great hath been the fury of his wrath. The people of the left hand sigh and bemoan. The people of the right abide in noble habitations. They quaff the wine that is life indeed from the hands of the All-Merciful and are verily the blissful.
Thank you.
Wow. There was a lot in that one.
Yeah. The true physician is debarred from administering the remedy. What's he talking about there?
The truth. Oh, right here, highlighted.
Yeah.
I guess, like the true physician, as in Baha'u'lláh, right?
Right.
People
Yeah.
aren't turning to him, or
He's
are,
the one that has the true remedy to get us out of here, right?
yeah.
We're the ones who have to give it. You know, we're the medicine. We're like the druggists who have the divine remedy that we have to give to the world, right? But it's
Yeah.
being kept from being able to give the remedy. He's got the remedy for all this mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's interesting because in that talk from Baha'i Blocks by Adib Tarzadeh,
Mhm.
he was saying that every like being every Baha'i, it's not accident why a person becomes a Baha'i or learns of Baha'u'llah. It's as if he was saying, as if like our soul was chosen for it. God knew who he was choosing, and
Yeah.
who he wanted to like spread the message. I don't know, maybe I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Suri Race is the tablet to race. Is this one of the ones that, John, what do you know about that, or Surush? I didn't look that one up.
I'm ashamed of my ignorance here, but I think Rais means something like a leader or a,
Oh, right.
a
Yeah,
boss
like
or
a
something like
leader.
that. I don't know. I'm not sure if I've read it.
Are you talking about the tablets to the kings?
This is very possible. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Rais in Farsi, isn't that what you like call like your manager at work?
That would be the leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a
Yeah.
leader. Yeah.
Yeah.
John, do you know? Where's Shaheen when we need him tonight? So after
What they said is right. So Rais in Farsi, you call that the person who's leading you, like the boss.
Yeah.
and this is this tablet. So he says, from the time he revealed that tablet until now, nothing's changed. He was kept from administering the remedy while unskilled practitioners, the doctors who don't know what they're doing, in other words, the leaders of the world don't know what they're doing, and their consultants are regarded with favor, accorded full freedom to act. The dust of sedition has clouded the hearts of men and blinded their eyes. The sedition toward religion, I think, is what he's talking about, that they don't want to have anything to do with, and they're working against sedition. Sedition is also working against religion, have clouded the hearts of men and blinded their eyes. But then the day's coming where they're going to see what the truth is, what the consequences of what their hands have wrought in the day of God. This is the day when the earth shall tell out her tidings. And then he talks about judgment. The crier hath cried out, and men have been torn away. So great hath been the fury of his wrath. God isn't going to let this go on forever. The people of the left hand sigh and moan, so there's been judgment. And then there's the people of the right hand who abide in noble habitation.
What was meant by the first highlighted, the first sentence? Yeah, this so often. This one.
The civilization so often vaunted by the learned exponents of arts and sciences will, if allowed to overleap the bounds of moderation, bring great evil upon men. He's essentially talking about what we would call Western civilization, with its industrialization, its technology, science, the arts, symphony orchestras and Mozart and Shakespeare and great glowing, gleaming cities, can bring evil in addition to bringing good. I mean, one of the most telling examples of what the industrial world was able to produce was the killing machines at Auschwitz and the concentration camps. Industrial murder, using a whole systematic way of round them up, put them in train cars, get them to this first place, and here buildings set up to just kill X number of people per hour, in an industrial fashion. That's true evil. Using what had been learned from the Industrial Revolution. So, even the arts and sciences. If the arts make you only think about unrestrained sexuality, then they're ruining you. They're ruining the whole basis of society, the family, the raising of children, the bringing of children into the world. Sciences, we have sciences that make atom bombs, right? Germ warfare. The COVID-19 bug probably came out of a laboratory. So he's saying that we shouldn't be so delighted about civilization. A civilization can be both good and evil. If carried to excess, civilization will prove as prolific a source of evil as it has been of goodness when kept within the restraints of moderation. So he gives us a lot to think about. Any thoughts, questions, comments, whatever for what we've gone over this evening? The sections we'll go over at the end of the letter next week are ones that are much more hopeful, where he's giving us the vision of what the world can be. We've talked about that some in the earlier letters, and he's sort of repeating certain themes, but it's because he considers them important. And as he repeats them, he also goes in more depth to them. So we'll finish up the letter next week, and I hope we'll have enough time to have maybe some general consultation, questions, whatever that you folks want to talk about now that we'll have gone through the whole book. And how do you feel having gone through this amazing collection of the Guardian's writings from 1929 to 1936, and especially with the dispensation of Bahá'u'lláh in the middle of it? What have you gained from it, and what appreciate? And one of the great things is the appreciation of Shoghi Effendi. But when there's so much insight in this book, it's amazing. You guys are all quiet.
So much to take in.
Yeah, this is such a deep. There's so much. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, like looking again at Priceless Pearl this last week. Rahia Khanum says that she thinks during this period was when Shoghi Effendi really sort of got his stride as a writer, his ability to convey what he wanted to convey. And you can see from that first letter, which was only about 10 pages long, this one is 40 pages.
Mm.
And what comes next is Advent of Divine Justice, which is one letter, but in the form of a book. And then Promised Day Has Come, which is another long letter, but in the form that really is a book. And then once he gets into the 1950s, he doesn't write long letters like this anymore.
Isn't this what they consider his will and testament?
Abdul Baha's Will and Testament,
No, Shoghi Effendi's.
he didn't have a will.
Oh.
Although his wife often said the dispensation was the closest thing to a will.
Mm.
Because he's really said everything out in that. In fact, he himself said that most everything he needed to say, he said in the dispensation of Bahá'u'lláh. So we've now all been through that too. Remember, he's talking about what's going on in his day in the 1930s, in the run up to World War II. But he's also giving us a way to look at our own time, to see it with the kind of eyes he saw things, to look for points where we see Baha'i teachings finally being put into action.
Mm.
Or like this hopeful thing that happened with the League of Nations and condemning Italy. To look for those signs, and to look at the signs of disintegration and look at the signs of building up, because they're both there. They're both there. So see the times we're living in with the same eyes as the Guardian. That's the challenge. All right, so I'm sorry we had a small group this evening, but I think universities are back, work is back. People are getting busy again. Life happens. So I will look forward to seeing all of you guys next week. And we'll finish it up.
We will be back. Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. All right, let me stop share on this.